Amanda is the author of It Still Moves, Lost Songs, Lost Highways, and the Search for the Next American Music, as well as the book Pink Moon. She's a contributing editor to the Oxford American, and her music and culture writing have appeared in the New York Times, Spin, and The Atlantic, as well as on Pitchfork, BuzzFeed, and elsewhere. Amanda teaches creative writing at New York University, and her new book about 78 RPM record collectors, Do Not Sell at Any Price, is forthcoming from Scribner in 2014. So please join me in welcoming Amanda and our other participants.
Thank you all so much for coming tonight, and thanks, of course, to Michael and Andrea and the Graduate Center for having us. I'm very excited to introduce these three esteemed gentlemen. Starting to your left, that is Travis Morrison. Travis is the lead singer and guitarist of the Dismemberment Plan, a Washington, D.C.-based rock and roll band that's been active since 1993. They've released 5 records and toured America, Europe, and Japan extensively. He is also the co-founder of Shoutable, a social networking, commerce, and site hosting service for artists. So welcome, Travis. Thanks for being here. Next to Travis is Randall Doan. Randall grew up in Stockton, California, and after earning degrees at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and San Francisco State University, he enrolled at the Graduate Center in Sociology and completed his doctoral studies here in 2003. He's taught courses at New York University, Queens College, and Case Western Reserve University, and has written articles on Slater-Kinney, Hamill on Trial, Illegal File Sharing, American Musical Tastes, and Ralph Ellison. His new book, Stealing All Transmissions, A Secret History of the Clash, is the only American history of, circa 1979, the only English band that mattered. That is a bold claim, Randall, but I'm on board. And then finally, Jake Ottman, who began his career as an assistant at Elektra Records, where he worked his way up to overseeing radio promotion for the entire alternative music roster. Today, he is responsible for signing and developing new and established songwriters for the East Coast creative team of Warner Chappell Music. Previously at EMI Publishing, he signed successful acts such as The Fray, Metro Station, Boys Like Girls, Chitty Bang, Neon Hitch, and 303. Welcome, Jake. Thank you again, all of you, for being here. So we're here to talk tonight broadly about music in the digital age, and particularly how innovations in technology and the concordant shifts in culture have affected the notion of being a fan. So I was hoping we could chat for a little while, and then after 45 minutes, we'll open it up to the audience for questions. And I thought maybe a nice place to start would be with each of you talking just a little bit about the first kind of band or scene that you went in big for, kind of capital F fan. Travis, maybe we could start with you.
That would be Talking Heads. I remember hearing Burning Down the House in front of a grocery store near my house when I was 11. And then my older dope-smoking cousin said, "You like that? Well, let's watch Stop Making Sense." And I was still 11, and I was like, yeah, that's the job for me. So I would say Talking Heads.
Not a bad place to start. Randall?
Oh, for me, I'd say it was 1982. I was touring Europe with the Boy Scouts of America at age 13. And we were based in England at the end of the trip in Coventry. And I got turned on to the Specials and a whole bunch of other bands that hadn't had much airplay in the US, and I came back to Stockton and promptly quit the Boy Scouts. And yeah, then sort of, I guess, not say dedicated my fandom years to, I think first and foremost, yeah, British punk and post-punk, and then the Americana sound that sort of followed after that in the mid-'80s.
Great. Jake?
Oh my God. Well, first of all, I'm like way older than you guys, so that's awesome to establish that fact right now. I can say right now that I was born and raised in Maine, and where there's two kinds of music, to quote blues, but there's country and there's western. Like actually, I grew up in like the kind of like arena metal. Or Leonard Skinner was kind of the sort of ubiquitous sounds of Maine, right? Anything with like guitar. So I I kind of snuck into college. I sort of I had no intention to go to college. I got to college, and I talked my way in. I'm a very, very charming person. And I talked my way into college, and I had a roommate, and he had like a motorcycle. He had, I think back then they called him like Teddy Boy. He was dressed like a Teddy, like an MC jacket and boots. And he's like, he asked me a couple of questions. He was a DJ at the college radio station, and he asked, this is the University of Southern Maine in Portland, which is the big city. And he's like, well, what are you into musically? And I was like, I don't know, like Leonard Skinner. And he said, and he gave me Gen X. He gave me Elvis Costello and the Attractions, the first record. He gave me Stick Little Fingers. He gave me a couple other really interesting kind of pop punk rock bands, I think maybe. He gave me the Clash, the early Clash records, not like, really, really early stuff. And he said, study this and we'll talk, and maybe we can hang out and be cool if you like it. And that was the rabbit hole, and I kind of never came back.
Amanda, can I say one more thing
Yeah,
on this?
of course.
Just because, of course, it's thematic with the passing of Lou Reed. Rest in peace, of course. And I don't know if there are any students here from the Graduate Center, but maybe there's a dissertation topic here. But one of the big forces in my own fandom was the acquisitions person for the public library in Stockton, California. And that's where I first heard Metal Machine music. It was at the public library.
Yeah.
And so I think like that's I'll talk a little about cultural gatekeepers and folks, and I think the librarian is an underrated person in the history of popular music. Somebody should do that.
The dope smoker cousin.
Well, the older brother or the older cousin is key, but the librarians, I think somebody's got to do their justice.
Roommate, anything?
Yeah.
I think that's a great point. I think that's an incredible point.
Yeah, well, absolutely, Randall. And I do want to talk more about those cultural gatekeepers and sort of how those roles are shifting. But I thought we could start a little bit about kind of defining what it means to be a fan in 2013. And Randall, I know you've thought and written somewhat extensively about the idea that a fan base needs a kind of identifiable villain, that there needs to be a sort of common enemy to rally against for a subculture like that to properly coalesce. But these days, I mean, our membranes are so permeable. Everyone is sort of consuming everything all the time. It's less about making those choices, right? It's less about The Clash versus Van Halen or kind of whatever the binary may be. I mean, do you think that niche fan bases are still defining themselves in opposition to mainstream culture?
I think the mainstream seems more innocuous, based on the students that I talk to. You know, as we discussed before, it was clear. Let's say Combat Rock, the Clash's album, comes out in May 1982. And the top of the pops at that point, it's Vangelis's Chariots of Fire, and then that's succeeded by McCartney and MJ's Ebony and Ivory. I mean, fairly innocuous stuff for the most part. But the center was, as far as we were concerned, was for like Foreigner and Journey, and then Van Halen, right? And I mean, Van Halen, my gosh, just the virtuosity and the decadence and the spandex and the hair and the hairspray and the well-teased chest hair. I mean, what was that about? And so it was so easy to sort of put them up as an enemy in a way. And I think that sentiment, that, dare I say, anger, whatever you want to call it, that's the real fanatical quality of being a fan. And so if you don't have that on your side, I think it can be tough. And I do think it's different. I think there are lots of, multiple margins without a center at this point.
That's interesting. I mean, do you guys agree? Do you think that, because I spend some time around young people, I teach at New York University, and there is that sense that, I don't know, that, that kind of vitriol that I remember having as a kind of righteous youth, that there was something you had to fight against and you sort of got your team, you were an army, that seems to have dissipated. I mean, and I wonder how that affects kind of the passion that we have for the bands that we love. I mean, Jake, working in A&R, you must see some of that a little bit, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I was alive. I was actually in the business. I think one of the real turning points is the Nirvana moment, right? I don't know if you guys remember the Nirvana moment. Where were you? I mean, it's almost like, to me, it's like I don't think, I wasn't alive when Kennedy got shot. I had to think about that for a minute. I wasn't alive. But I remember where I was, when the Nirvana moment, and it was a phenomenon that I'll never forget. It was like Nirvana. I mean, I knew Nirvana because I was into Sub Pop, right? And I loved Bleach, which is their record. But, you know, the record, the Smells Like Teen Spirit came out, and the Mr. Big was #1, all right? It was hair metal. And then I remember there's 2 points I'll make. The first point was I just remember all the hair metal guys going like, what's going on? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you could, like, be a hair metal band. You could release a record, you know? You could get on a tour with, you know, a third on a bill, and you go platinum. You almost certainly go platinum just because you had great hair, the coif was right, and, you know, you could shred a little bit, and you go platinum. And I remember them going like, oh no, and then, like, it just toppled, right? But to me, Nirvana, that's when, like, the alternative nation won the war. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Suddenly, so now all these kids are raised on hip parents. Like, you know, I signed Boys Like Girls. Do you ever, like, I got to go to a barbecue with my hipster friends in Brooklyn and be like, hey, what'd you sign lately? And I'm like, well, I signed Boys Like Girls. Clearly you would never have fucking heard of that band in your life. You know what I mean? Like, there's no cool, like, and all the parents I hang out with, they're like the Clash, man. They got like a, you know, disco doesn't suck anymore. You know what I mean? In a lot of ways, it's like, it's weird, man. You know, James Murphy made disco
nothing
cool
sucks
again.
anymore. I mean, that's sort of the argument,
well, no,
right? That, like,
actually,
we're assimilating everything.
Music is I don't know. There's like, you know, terrestrial radio maybe sucks now. Maybe that is, you know, it's suddenly. I signed the Fray, and at one point it was a really cool band. I sent all my cool friends, like, hey, it's American Coldplay. And then, of course, it became ubiquitous, and you heard it, and you still hear it 1,000 million times a day, and not quite as much anymore. And then it became uncool, and suddenly it was like, oh, I got to talk about them at the barbecue. No. You know what I mean? I don't have James Murphy. I don't have, like, you know, Dismemberment Plan. You know, like, Dismemberment Plan in the long run is probably way cooler than most of the bands I'll sign right now that work mainstream music. But anyway, my point is,
seats?
We'll see.
my point is like, I think, like, the alternative nation kind of won the war.
Yeah.
So it's really kind of turned the whole idea of, you know, your really valid point upside down in a lot of ways. Does that make sense?
I feel like one important thing is whether or not the culture needs a negatory voice. And America just got out of a very turbulent time where negatory negation in the real market sense didn't really work. Gitmo's still open. And so everyone, I think, music is in a bit of a reaction, kind of where it was in the mid-'70s. But you go to Russia, and it's Pussy Riot. And I don't know if you've ever A-B'd Pussy Riot in terms of the sound against the most complicated pitchfork-approved metal. It blows it out of the water. Like, Pussy Riot, it's like your computer's gonna explode. That metal stuff, it's great, I love it, but it's a little under glass. It's art. Mm-hmm. So our culture, there's no real space for negation, for that negatory voice. And maybe there will be again, but if there's no space in the culture for it, any art that just opts for it because you feel like you're supposed to do it because that's what you do in this art form is going to flail a little bit. It's not going to have anything to push against.
That's interesting. I mean, do you think that's a function of a kind of self-consciousness that we're sort of experiencing in this particular cultural moment?
No, I just think that, again, like the culture, what would we negate right now? It's hard to point a negative energy towards any one cultural thing. I mean, again, all through the aughts, it was incredibly intense. And I don't know, besides Obama winning, which was very transformative for our entire culture, I don't know. I don't know if it's so much self-consciousness. I just think it's a question of, you know, in the 80s, you wanted to negate Reagan. You just wanted to get him out of there, just wipe him from the, you know. So it's a little more diffuse now, I guess.
Well, think of a story that Gina Arnold told. I think she was in Hawaii and she was seeing Nirvana on New Year's Eve, and when they come out of that party, and Rolling Stone the next issue was already on the newsstand, and Smells Like Teen Spirit was at #1, or maybe the album was at #1 at that point, and she turns to her friend and says, George Bush will not be reelected. Like the connection between, the negative power, the critical power of Nirvana, for them meant something that was really going to be something big. Now, it's a bit of hubris there, but we can't even imagine that type of hubris related to music at this point.
Well, there was no, MIA and the Hold Steady were not going to get W out of there. I love both bands, but
Right.
they're art. It's art. It's not like feral culture voice,
I think many people too came to sort of, when the Occupy Wall Street movement, I think, failed in some ways to kind of coalesce in what felt like a really useful or sort of propulsive way. A lot of critics were talking about how there was no sort of musical center to that. Which seems like a kind of peripheral thing to worry about when you're talking about something like that, but there wasn't really a rallying cry in the sort of historical sense of what we're talking about. Is that a function that music has lost in the digital age?
Music is how people talk, so if people don't want to say it, they're not going to do it in music. You know what I mean? Like, you can go beyond the music and just look at the culture and see, there's all kinds of reasons to think we're going to a more transparent place. This could all be poppycock in the end, but we're going to a more transparent place, we're going to a more open place, if we just kind of let Google and Facebook take us there. So, and we'll see, But until then, I totally understand why people be like, well, I'm not really sure why I would go out and throw rocks at people in the street. Like, who do I throw the rock at? Again, it's more diffuse to me. I don't know what you guys think.
I think, one of the phenomenon that I feel is at least in the A&R sense, is that a lot of music, this is hopefully take this in the spirit in which I mean it. I might get filleted for this, but I think it's lost its male voice. For me, a lot of music has lost like the male kind of like fan. You know what I mean? Like when I was a kid, like it was like I remember growing up in the business. It was like you gotta get that male fan, 18 to 23. Those are your guys. You'll stay with you for the rest of your life. Metallica, blah blah blah. All those bands. And now I go to a rock show and. I go to a popular music show, and it's 2/3 female. I find that young males are way more interested in video games. You know what I mean? And to some degree, like the CD turned music into some sort of software thing. And I think we're at the end of it now. But like music, the songs became sort of. It's like the America Online, like CDs and America Online and software, and you know what I mean? There was a bit of a moment where it was just like, it's just music, I think, honestly, that we're coming to the end of that, and I feel a little bit more of a strong kind of foundation of music, and but I don't know. I think really there's not a tremendous male population out there demanding whether it's guitar or whatever. And the other thing is the discovery. Like the primary mover, I feel right now, the cultural kind of pushing moment is discovery. It's like I know more than you do. I have more interesting stuff on my iPod than you do, as opposed to I just love the song, or like I'm into that dude's hair or her voice, or it's more like I just know more than you do. I have a broader. I scour the net better than you. That's a. Tie that together, but.
Well, it's interesting, the idea that kind of broadness would be prized, whereas what we were talking about earlier, with certainly the kind of fans we grew up as, it was single-mindedness was sort of prized, right? Like you had your band, and that was your band, and you sort of rode hard for that band, and that was it. You didn't kind of look elsewhere.
Jacket.
Yeah, right. Like all you had every. I feel like I used to kind of measure my fandom via paraphernalia. It was like how much stuff did I have? In the absence of that, well, now what? Now what does being a fan mean? If not that.
I think is right, the curatorial aspect of it. I feel like the loss of geography, with the very notable exception of Baltimore in indie rock, which is an intensely local feeling scene, a very unified vibe to a lot, as different as a lot of performers are. The loss of record stores, the rise of all-you-can-eat music sources, both legal
Music from
and
Underground
illegal.
still exists in Baltimore, by the way. That was like
From what?
music.
Oh, the record store?
Yeah.
I think it is. Yeah.
does.
Yeah. So yeah, I think what you're saying about the curatorial thing, and maybe that sapped a little bit of the virility, perhaps, to the identification, because you can't go to the club. Well, you can still, but it's not the only way to do it. There was no other way when I was in high school but to go to the record store or to go to the club where this band was playing and let's see, I don't know. There's 3 bands?
But the biggest scene right now is like the DJ movement, right? It's bigger in Las Vegas than gambling.
Well, is that a scene or is that, I mean,
And those guys, what are those guys but curators? They're you know, what are you doing when you're a DJ but you're out finding the coolest new beat or sampling the most obscure thing? You know what I mean? There's an element to that.
But that, in some level, it is popular music and it's not, right? Because I can't replicate that at home. And so I think when we're talking about fandom, you know, in terms of the devotion, I think what was key growing up for me was that we had a regional-based set of DJs and rock critics who we really followed. Right. And they provided us with playlists and a common set of texts by which we constructed our fandom. So, you know, it's, let me think back. Spring 1986, I saved up $15 or whatever. I go down to Tower Records and I pick up the Replacements' Tim and Husker Du's Candy Apple Grey. And I hadn't heard a single song off of either of those albums. But because the right critics said the right things about these 2 bands, I would go out and do that, right? And that type of consensus, that's what builds the sociality. And then, of course, because it's a ritual, because you actually have an album to listen to, you invite your friends over or whatever, and you listen to the whole thing, you really listen. And then maybe you make a tape for them, and now it's their responsibility to go out and buy Let It Be or Flip Your Wig or whatever it is. And there's sort of, there's a sociality there that, you know, rather than the holier than thou or the narcissism of small differences that informs, oh, but have you heard this beat? Right? I think that's a different, there's something qualitatively different in that regard. And again, it's not, I don't want to blame it on the kids today. But, you know, to be honest, they don't have any leisure ethic. Honestly, like they just don't work hard enough in their pleasure. And that's not their fault. But I think it does affect the depths and or the fanaticism of your fandom.
to Jake's point, probably EDM has a hot hand because it's the best ticket for having a physical communal experience. I think that's why it's so popular. It's rock. I don't know. I mean, I'm 40, but I don't get the sense that rock and roll quite has as much of that physical magnetic energy as Deadmau5 does right now. You go see a show, you go see Arcade Fire, but I'm not really sure if like the crazy swarm following is quite as intense as it is for Deadmau5 or Avicii or whatever.
There's certainly less drugs involved. It just wouldn't be a talk about rock and roll without a talk about drugs. But Randall, to your point about gatekeepers, I mean, that's a really interesting question for me. I think certainly, you know, we don't really rely on critics for that anymore. I'm not sure we really rely on our A&R guys. I'll see you on the unemployment line. I don't know. I mean, how do people find new bands? How is that working right now?
Oh, I mean, I think that's a very good question. I mean, it's obviously a lot of word of mouth. It's YouTube, it's the social media networks and the rest. And again, back to that question of all these margins without a center. And I just don't know, you know, even at Oberlin College where I work, if you could define like the groups around certain things as well as we could, let's say back at Santa Barbara, for example. Many more students, but there's just fewer choices at some level. And so when you really had to choose, that really meant something. You know, where your alliances or your alignments were. So yeah, there's a lot of EDM fans there too, but we had the Breeders come through town and they sold out, so that was great too. So, I mean, there is a variety there, but it's, I don't know, it does seem different and more transient.
It's still manual recommendations for me. I just noticed the other day, I very rarely hear a song I dig on Twitter or Facebook. Email, if someone's like, this is really good, Travis. I'm like, click. You know, I was thinking about this, about my own discovery habits. I don't know what you guys would say about it. But for me, it's mostly talking or it's email. Social media is not so good for it. for me. It just doesn't happen. I don't want to say not good for it, it just doesn't happen. I don't frequently. How about you guys? If you guys discover a song or discover a band, like in the last 2 weeks, where was it most of the time?
Well, for me, it's never 2 weeks. Since I have the privilege of being, at a college, I feel like as long as I'm less than 1 year behind the kids, I'm doing my job. Like I don't want to be too much on the cutting edge and take that coolness away from them.
Yeah, right. You're a creeper.
So what I do is I go through the Village Voices Passenjot poll at the end of the year, find 20 songs off that list that I can, brook, and then put that on a CD, and I've got my little archive of what happened in 2012.
I mean, and Jake, I'm especially interested in how you would go out to find new bands now. I mean, imagine in the course of your career that's changed dramatically, that sort of acquisitions process.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it has. It's really changed dramatically. I definitely agree. Like, I think email. And I'm not sure. I'm not a kid. I think email is definitely like what your parents use if you're under, you text now. Email, anything emailed to me, I find generally speaking to be a vehicle of some sort of, junk mail or something like that. So, you know what I mean? It sort of pollutes the process.
Right. Oh, but I mean like from a friend.
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of MP3s, but I mean, for me, it's always been word of mouth for me. I talk. You'll find I talk nonstop. I'm pretty unskilled in life except for music. I talk about music a lot, so it's really. I used to tape trade when I was a kid, or should I say college? Because I didn't really start doing it until I was 18. But tape trading was big, and I used to find. So I always value someone's opinion. You know what I mean? I don't read the blogs a lot because I'm overwhelmed. I'm really overwhelmed, and I have certain prejudices against like blogs, and So for me, it's usually just a word of mouth. I have a certain gatekeepers, and they're not necessarily professional people in the business per se. They're just people that I know that have really strong opinions. They do read the blogs, and that's how I kind of. I also buddy down with a lot of people, you know what I mean? And people bring me a lot of information. They kind of mule it into me. So.
I mean, it's interesting, actually, to hear all of your responses because, so many things are changing in the ways in which we acquire and consume music, but things are clearly staying the same, too. I mean, in some ways, it's still like we like bands that, our friends tell us we'll like, or we hear about it from, people that we talk to.
I think seeing a band open for a band you like is still very powerful. Yes. I mean, probably the most intense discovery I have. Oh! Has this been a problem the whole time? I want you guys to hear every word I say, because I'm smart. Okay. Probably the most intense discovery the last 5 years was seeing Tune Yards open for Dirty Projectors. And I actually hugged Meryl Garbus after her set. I left halfway through Dirty Projectors. I was like, well, that's it. That's what I needed tonight. So for me, at least, I don't know if that's a vestige of my age or whatever, but that's still a very intense way of discovering.
Yeah, that's nice when that happens.
Right? It hits all five senses at once. And you have other people discovering it in real time with you, around you. I mean, the whole room was like, oh my God, and you feel like you're seeing A Star Is Born or something,
Right. I mean, and that communal experience of music, I think, is a thing we all feel sort of threatened by the loss of that, certainly as we kind of move forward into the future. Randall, I know you had some thoughts on sort of speed and access and how that's affecting the ways in which we consume music.
Oh, well, sure. I think, for folks who have the handout handy, I'm thinking here of lines 4 and 5. And just to give you a sense, and we'll see if this can get a rise out of Jake here. But I think we have the illusion of speed with the transmission speeds and whatnot, and everything is so accessible. And there's an illusion of a democratic marketplace out there, and that any song can go #1 and the rest, and the illusion of hierarchies, that these have all collapsed. But that's actually, if you look, like, this is just one index, the one that, because I was too busy listening to other things, do any more work on. But I mean, if you look at the median number of singles from each year, 87 to 92, and we're talking 28. So, less than 2 weeks at the top on average for each of those songs. And then which of those songs went on to sell more than 5 million? Not even 2 a year, right? And so in the last 5 years, half the number of songs are making it, or are holding the top for the whole year, and then each of these songs and 1 or 2 more are selling 5 million a piece. And this is with a much smaller pie, right, of the music industry in terms of this huge drop from $19 billion down to $8 billion. So, and then, from 2012, again, we had 12 #1 songs, and only one of those songs was not under the general rubric of Sony, Universal, and Warner.
What was it?
I'm blanking on it, actually. It was an X song on the XL record, whichever one that was.
Adele? Was it Adele?
Yeah, I think that's right.
What was it, Jake? Sorry.
Adele?
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
I think that's
You know her?
Of course. Yeah. I've heard of her. I've heard of her.
Yeah,
So full to talk at barbecues?
Your discovery is messed up.
Sorry.
so I do
Randall.
think that things, have changed, just not in the way I think that the stories that we're telling each other about the music industry, it's not actually accurate, at least at that part. Now, if you were to do a more rigorous sample and look at, let's say, the top 10, I mean, finding bands like Grizzly Bear and Foster the People and other folks up at the top, that's pretty cool stuff. I mean, I think that's sort of, I think, where it's most vexing is that, you look at the statistics, dare I say, and it looks pretty grim, but there is so much fun music out there now at the same time. So,
I think, if I may jump in, one of the sort of situations that happened in, line 6, Sony. By the way, I'm certainly not going to be a company man here. But
That's mine.
what happened is there aren't many A&R guys left. There used to be, in theory, like you'd be an A&R guy, you'd go to the club, you'd to the bitter end or wherever it was, and to Brownies, to Mercury Lounge. You'd see this great band, you sign them, and by the way, this is a theory because I don't know, and you develop it, and it would come up through your system, and they'd write that #1 hit, and you'd have a #1. And that was the A&R jobs person, the A&R man, woman. They did that. They brought this band along in the system. Now what happens is there's no more A&R people developing something out of the club, bringing it in, the boardroom. This is the next big thing. What it is like SoundCloud, Pitchfork, YouTube, to some degree, the numbers will pop up and it'll be like, or oh my God, like this band, where the hell have they been? And they'll snag them, midstream. Actually, most of the bands that are getting signed they're successful, which is another point. The digital music is pushing the live. It's digital music is now live music. You know what I mean? If you ask me, but so a lot of those numbers, their bands are Macklemore. Is the one exception. In 2013, that song I think is a number. They've had several #1s. He has. He's still independent and hasn't. He refused to sign. But a lot of those bands are coming along. They're so big, and then the major will plop it down and be like, okay, now we get to claim it as a #1, but it was just a check. You know what I mean?
Well, that's interesting. So, I mean, clearly we're kind of alive in a moment in which anyone with a laptop can record and promote and release a record on their own. I mean, and I guess it returns to the question of gatekeepers, which is that, the signal to noise ratio gets so sort of skewed. and it's one of the complicated things I think about being a music fan right now is sort of how do you figure out what to kind of hitch your wagon to, right? I mean, there's so many choices that you actually don't have to make a choice, which I guess is what we're saying. You can kind of put everything on your iPod and that becomes your identity as a fan. You know, I'm sort of into a little bit of everything. But I mean, in terms of the work that you do of finding bands and bringing them to labels, so you're basically saying, you know, the bands are already sort of halfway there by the time they get to you.
Yeah, it's interesting because the phenomenon, okay, if I may relay an anecdote. I was in the studio last night. First of all, Friday night I went to go see a metal show, and everybody in the room, this metal show, it was Lamb of God, and I was young by comparison, which was interesting. Last night I was in the studio. I love to say that, by the way. That's something I've always wanted to say in my entire life. I was in the studio, so I'm saying it publicly. Yay! So I was in the studio with I'm not going to say his name because because who knows, maybe it'll go on YouTube. But he was a very big rapper. He's from Chicago. He's unsigned. He's selling out everywhere he plays. He's got a 3-word name. And he was there last night going, I'm giving away, he's like, everybody wants to sign this guy. All the jerks like me are chasing him around. Hey, money, money, money. He's like, why do I need money? I'm 20.
And he's really young, yeah.
He's super young. My boss, my super high-powered boss, was in Stockholm. No, he wasn't even in Stockholm. He was somewhere way up in Sweden last week, and he's like, he was playing in wherever the heck it was in Sweden. He has no real interest in buying in or getting the check. He's there's a great New Yorker article about the economy in San Francisco right now and the kind of goodwill and all this stuff. I don't know. He just driving the car into the pool drunk. You know what I mean? The rock and roll, throwing your TV out the hotel window kind of opulence of old rock and roll. It's just not really a thing for him. It's just like, I'm making a great living. I have a great lifestyle. And he was talking, and there was another record guy in there, and they're like, well, don't you want me to give you money and you can become rich that way? He's like, no, I want to give away my record. You know what I mean? So it was a fascinating thing to watch this kid argue with this record guy, the label guy. He just had no desire to do it at this point. You know what I mean?
Well, why would he, right?
Right.
I mean, we've talked a lot, I guess, about how the sort of digital age has changed the way music gets promoted and distributed. But Travis, I was sort of curious about talking to you about how these kinds of changes in technology, and I don't necessarily mean technology in the studio, but changes in the way sound gets sort of disseminated, have affected songwriting. I mean, have affected the actual sort of art and craft of making music. I mean, do you think that younger songwriters or musicians are sort of writing with an ear to, well, this is going to get listened to on YouTube, or this is going to get listened to for 30 seconds before someone moves on, or,
Yeah, bands sound a lot better now. Mm-hmm. Remember when we were kids and bands sounded like shit? I'm not kidding. They were 4-track. The live thing, being good live was the main priority. And sometimes being live was such a priority, you sculpted the sound you made to that, and you didn't even really stop to write real songs. And you went to go see them, and it was awesome, and they did the craziest things. It was like the Butthole Surfers or something. And then you bought the record, and the record sat in the back of your car. You left it there the morning after the show. You never did take it out of the back seat until you sold the car. But you went to go see them again. And at a certain point, everyone realized, wow, if I play this song, it could show up on YouTube. And that combined with everyone's ability to hear everything ever made, I really think led to musicians having a higher level of craft earlier in their lives. And I would hear young bands on TV shows and on YouTube, I'm like, I don't understand. I still sound terrible. I've been trying for 20 years. And I just think they have the information and the motivation to sound good in the first place. That's a generational divide I feel very intensely with younger musicians. I think it means good things and bad things. I think it's good for me because it means I can still make money playing shows because we're better live. Mm-hmm. Older bands are better live. But they make better sounding records. They write better constructed songs. They don't make records, you don't hear records that just sound like, I don't know, we go in a studio because we were playing in clubs and we felt like we needed to have something to sell at the shows. I mean, I'm sure those exist, but I feel like the skill level is raised a lot. I mean, how do you feel about that as an A&R person? Do you ever feel like you wish you got them a little more unformed? Like you wish there were more possibilities and it was less together? Like, do you feel that as someone who's listening to music? Because I do.
It's interesting. I call it the Dr. Luke effect, you know. But
Right,
Yes.
and theoretically, anyone can do what Dr. Luke does. The same programs are available to everyone, right? We can all make a Miley record tomorrow if we approach it with the right mindset. That's it, right? It's not like you couldn't go to Sunset Sound.
yeah, but he's often referred to as like a scientist. He's a scientist, you know, and they go over. And
Jay, can you just, if anyone here happens to be unfamiliar with Dr. Luke, maybe give a quick intro? I mean, I don't even know how many #1 records that guy has written.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All of them.
Dr. Luke is, I guess, the Quincy Jones. I don't know, what would you compare him to? I mean,
Spectre.
Bill Spector.
Yeah.
Great, yeah. He's the kind of guy. He and this guy Max Martin kind of got together. Max Martin is a lyric melody guy, and Dr. Luke is kind of a rock guy actually. And but
Max Martin writes the lyrics?
I think so, doesn't he?
He's the Swedish one, right?
He's the Swedish
Oh.
guy, yeah, or German, Swedish.
Right.
Anyway, they got together. Sorry, I hope you're not watching this. They got together, and Dr. Luke he controls all the. He wrote the big Miley Cyrus Wrecking Ball record. He wrote. Oh my God! Pretty much every top 40,
Yeah.
all the Katy Perry records.
Kesha,
Yeah.
Rihanna.
It almost seems like conflict of interest
Right.
at a certain point. You're like Kesha and Katy Perry and like what?
But he's this guy.
This is a
that,
monopoly.
you know, he's just really, and he's got this sort of pyramid scheme of other little writers, and they just keep writing hits and hits and hits, and he's really controlling this two guys are controlling just market share, like triple-digit market share, you know, not triple-digit, but I mean, they're 100 and 200%. So he's just this guy, Dr. Luke. There's a great New Yorker article on him. Actually, it's not that great an article, but I found it. But there's a big piece on him like 2 weeks ago. If you so desire to read that.
Well, I do want to open it up to questions from the audience, but before I do that, is there anything else you guys would like to address that we haven't
I
covered
mean,
yet?
yeah.
Well, I was thinking about, you talk about the impact of the technology on how we think about music now, and I think it was one of the guys from Rock Nation talks about how when people turn on the radio, you've got 8 seconds before they're going to change the station, and so you've got to have a hook every 8 seconds in your song. And that seems quite incredible to me, and I'm thinking about, not too long ago, I was listening to Iggy Pop's The Passenger with my daughter in the back seat, and the lyrics don't come in until like 52 seconds in, and so 25 seconds in, she's like, are there any words in this song, right? Because she's being cued for that moment, right? And I think about Berry Gordy mixing stuff for Motown using automobile speakers, right? Because that's how people are going to hear it.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, I mean, do people mix stuff using desktop speakers now if they're going to be listening to it at their computer?
In that Max Martin piece, there's a great quote. I don't remember what the example uses. Maybe you remember this. It's outrageous. It's something like A Day in the Life, where it's like, that's a great, great song, but it takes a while for the vocals to come in. Which I was always like, man, that's balls. That's, I respect that. Sgt. Pepper, man, I wish I could get my hands on that. So yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, right. The Max Martin, the Dr. Luke version of Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah.
They really, there's an economy to it. It's quite economical.
You're right, though. It's hook after hook after hook after hook. You're so right.
But
It's
I think
almost
there's
trippy. It's almost like 40 songs in a row. I think when it's interesting, it can have really interesting artistic implications.
But the other thing that's happened, and I need to go back and look more, but my impression is that pop songs, we don't have 3-minute heroes anymore. We have 4.5, 5-minute heroes. Because Americans, if you're going to give them something less than 3.5 minutes, they're just going to steal it. But if you give them quantity, if you supersize their song, then they'll give you the 99 cents for it. And I do think if you look at the charts, you can see that there is a longer progression from earlier analog days into the current download days.
That's really interesting. Well, more to say about all of that, certainly, but are there any questions from the audience? Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, it was interesting to me
guys.
too. I mean, well, when you said that specifically that's a coveted fan for a band, right? Like that's who you want. You want to get the 19-year-old dude. I mean, I've never heard that before. That's really fascinating. But labels were thinking, I mean, those are the loyal fans. So that's been proven that they're more loyal.
Metallica, you know,
Yeah.
the Metallica moment. Really.
Well, I think that sociologists would talk about this, what they call the homosocial triangle of bonding, all right? And that men cannot have an emotional bond here, but if we pick out an object out there and we can talk about its disinterested qualities, then we're bonding, right? And women actually aren't burdened with that. They can actually talk to each other. So they don't feel the need to master like all the liner notes on the White Album or, you know, the Class box set or whatever, and they can still have friendships. But I don't know. I wanted to talk about La Tigra somewhere in here because I think that they're a really interesting band in terms of, you know, the cultural politics question and the stuff that they've done. But maybe we can come back to that because they're an interesting case study.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want to pick up that point about gender and wonder if you introduced hip hop into the equation, you might sort of answer it slightly differently. See, I live a block from Webster Hall in the East Village, and the crowds that are filling up my street are pretty mixed, particularly when there are rappers and hip hop groups there. And so I wonder if some of this needs to be not so much racialized, but understood that there are discrete demographics for different kinds of music. And then with hip hop, it's now, you've got a lot of young white kids, males, lost in hip hop the way when I was growing up, I was lost in the blues. And that's not kind of uncommon thing. So if we sort of introduce the element of race in this, it sort of complicates it a little bit.
Yeah, don't take
Well, I'll jump in.
Definitely not answering these questions.
Oh, yeah, I mean, come on, I'm big on my cousin.
Yeah, right.
All right, so,
Jake.
take it. You're on your own, kid. They're pushing me. Everything's not gonna get up. Well, I'll tell you what. I can only share what I. By the way, I'm a music professional, and when I was reading the liner notes that these three very distinguished people here were passing, I was like, oh my God, I am so over my head, because I really pride myself on two things. My pedestrian ears and my pedestrian sort of musical tastes, you know what I mean? I don't read Pitchfork. You know why I don't read it? Because, I think they overthink it. You know what I mean? I think Pitchforks is like, it's just too overthought. You know what I mean? So that's why I kind of, like I said, I have certain prejudice against it. But, I think to answer your question racially right now, there's two phenomenons going on right now. And again, this is strictly a fairly accurate, I think, observation. I can't give you any data per se, but I think if you looked in the charts, there's MBAs in my company, Warner Chappell Music, who I'm sure I'm going to get a very distinct, report stating this, and that is hip hop sales are like down 50 to 60%. So the hip hop market, as we know, is really going underground. It's not selling. And the other phenomenon that I'm experiencing and that we discuss in our meetings is that like the idea of like pure R&B records that 5 years ago were sung by R. Kelly and all these, it's now it's white kids singing pure R&B. If you look at the song, there's two huge songs. The first Miley Cyrus record, What We Want, is a hip hop record with a girl singing over it. You know what I mean? You know, singing in this sort of dialect of hip hop. You know what I mean? The other song is a bit of a flip on it, but it's Lord, the Lord record, right? Which is almost a Nirvana-esque moment. This record came, we heard about this little thing in New Zealand, and now it's the tidal wave. It's #1 record, and it started as this little butterfly wing in New Zealand, and there was this record, Lord, and the record is called Royals, and it's an extraordinary song. But it's a hip hop record, kind of. It's a bit of a, it's sort of taking the piss out of the hip hop, you know, lexicon and stuff. But it's kind of that record, you know. So that's my take on race. It's almost inverted right now, you know, musically, genre speaking.
If I could say one more thing about gender, I don't think it's impossible for women and for female pop fans to take an artist very seriously. Oh, wait, impossible. Is that a double negative? There's my YouTube moment. It's not impossible. Both Exile in Guyville and Little Jagged Pill had their 20th recently, and my social feeds blew up. It was a major event. Right. And it wasn't just like, oh, I like that one song. It was like, that was crucial for me. That's a great record with all the passion that you could imagine a nerd boy putting into.
But it's different to say that now. It's different to say that 20 years out, don't you think? It's a little safer than being a young man in 1992 and saying like, Liz Phair, I love Liz Phair.
Well, I've always been a little weird. I mean, I don't know. I thought you were going to say, like, maybe it was safer for women to say it now.
Oh, no, I think it's safer for men to say it now.
Oh, well, yeah, sure, that could be. Yeah, maybe so. But, I mean, that was the Lilith time, and, you know, and you were saying Le Tigre.
Right.
I mean, they weren't the pop tip of the spear. That probably was, even more than Liz Phair, that was Alanis Morissette. Mm-hmm. So I think it's clearly possible. Let me see if I can get this tenses straight. Possible, but it's a different kind of relationship, and maybe the music industry is failing, or will get better at providing those kinds of passionate artist-fan relationships that are female archetyped.
One of the things I thought that was really interesting that Randall said earlier, I mean, and I've written quite a bit about record collectors, so it's sort of fresh in my mind, but that, you know, that this idea that it becomes this way of mediating that kind of intense thing we feel when we experience a piece of music, that, you know, if there's a sort of object we can talk about instead, and that being a sort of a male trait, what the loss of that object means, and if that is somehow related to the kind of loss of the young male music fan, because there's no longer a thing to sort of obsess over and discuss and kind of analyze.
You write about music, right?
I do.
I got an idea for you. You should compare.
Let me get my pen.
You should do a compare and contrast of the social media trail of the celebration of the 20th anniversary of In Utero and the 20th anniversary of Jagged Little Pill. Mm. Mm-hmm. Very interesting to compare and contrast the tenor of the conversations around those two records. Because the In Utero conversation was like pretty complicated.
Yeah,
and that was pretty doodly.
Mm-hmm.
But did
No,
Jagged
that is
Little
really
Pill come with a remastered version?
I mean, we recorded the whole thing, I think, about 4 years ago. So I'm sure I'd remaster it. Wouldn't you remaster it? Come on, man, 20 years, let's do this.
Let's take a few more questions. Yes.
Comment about what you're saying about Occupy movement. I think a lot of people say that it didn't have much effect on our planet. I completely disagree with that. Well, I mean, I was there on the first day. I spent some time there. I moved there, I lived there, or anything like that. But I think the reason, one of the main reasons, a lot of folks don't get back to that next week, is because that word really traveled around this 1% thing. And really got the idea. Now, I don't know if there's going to be any kind of
It's interesting. It has gotten harder, I guess, to kind of monetize dissent in that way, although I think Pussy Riot is a sort of interesting example, because that story was huge.
I mean, they had their little side project. It was like in Spanish or something. What were we saying about Pussy Riot? Were they able to make money?
No, but I'm saying that was, I mean, when I think of,
Wow.
no.
That's what it takes.
But I think of how big of a story that was. I mean, when I think of this sort of intersection of politics and music in the last year, that's what I think of.
Oh, well,
More than anything else.
When you're a musician, the one thing you learn is that renown does not equal money. Doesn't equal money. So,
Well,
I
it's
mean,
so hard.
That's in a news story.
And it's so hard to do something that's aesthetically effective and politically effective. I mean, I think you could suggest that maybe, we have to go back to Sandinista, honestly, to find something that, sounds good, is danceable, and is critical in that regard. As far as something that was reviewed in the New York Times and elsewhere, that really had that critical mass.
But don't you think it depends on how you define politics? I would say Jagged Little Pill is a very political
Yes,
record.
again.
Not for you.
Well,
not for me.
yeah. No, actually, that's not true.
The cross-eyed bear.
No, you and I we're implicated in that record, so don't let us off the hook so easily on
I was
that.
not.
Yes.
I'm a high school social worker in the South Bronx, so all my kids are rappers.
Do you have any tapes?
I'm interested in the creative economy because I'm this kind of gap in the music business also potentially is an opportunity for them. Because how are they from the grassroots? Because even though there was this point where we had this kind of shared agreement about what music was, it was also excluded a lot of people. And so I kind of appreciate the opportunity now that everybody can put out their own view and their own thing, and that there's this, there's all this technology that allows people to create good music. Some of it's good and some of it's not, or whatever. Everybody has their own different opinions, but I would encourage industry people to think that, I'm a social worker, so I'm like, everybody has something to give, we all have something to learn from each other, and we all have something to teach each other. So that maybe industry people could think about, what can you teach kids coming up, about how maybe they could market their skills on a smaller scale. Because there's all this underground, hip-hop there's all this underground stuff going on. A lot of it is out of the industry. But it's huge business, and everybody's doing it. So, and it would be great in New York if we could find ways to support the development of those businesses and maybe foster and mentor, some of the young people that are coming up out of this.
That's true. And if I can speak to that as someone who used to be in music, music is very much the circus coming to town, and photographers jump on board, and it's almost like pro sports in that way, and you can either turn it into a springboard to, maybe you'll be one of those freaks of nature that raps till they're 40. Rapping to 40, I'm 40, and Jay-Z is like, wow, right? That guy's rapping and he's my age. But more to the point, the passion of the cultural connection, there's things to learn about life, there's things to learn about running a small business, there's things to learn about watching your P's and Q's, there's things to learn about networking and the people who will go on to be photographers. And music as an art form is extremely promiscuous in how it's a crossing station and cross-disciplinary. So I think that's a really, really great point, that all this differentiation, it's a real golden opportunity to help kids learn all that stuff through music and make sure they just don't learn nothing, And thank you for coming. That made me feel happy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Sorry.
Who else is gonna?
Scoundrel, that would be me. By the way, I'm really ready to like, come on, man. You guys are, come on, you know you want to,
No, we're giving you all
that
the
guy. I want to be that guy.
gender, race, industry.
I'm
you're
trying
the
to set myself up. I mean, what do I gotta do? No, I think don't do it. Get out of the business immediately. You know, that's an interesting thing. Okay, so when I was a kid, like, my parents didn't want me to be in music. You know what I mean? They were like, don't be in music. Good for them.
Okay, you're not in music. I'm in music.
Yeah, okay.
Help me.
That's a great point. You know what? You know, you can come into my office and I'll take a meeting.
But you know, it's still crazy. It's still a crazy business, and you still have to do it because you love it.
But I think, to be honest, to answer your question directly, where is the power of the business? It is and always will be, I think, and always has been at the creative level, okay? So, you know what I mean? Like, I'm only as good as my people that I know that are creative, you know what I mean? And so, to me, the bottleneck used to be the record label, okay? That used to be where all the power is. I think it's moved down, a latch, you know what I mean? And I think really, management is kind of like, that's the bottleneck, all right? That's kind of like, you still gotta have the contacts. You don't need, there's no bottleneck at distribution, so, you know what I mean? But you still gotta have the Rolodex, you know what I mean? Or you gotta have a great band that you can put your new band that you love on tour with, and they can, you know, get discovered that way. So, to me, to answer your question directly, management is where it's at. Live, the other side is, the live music business, which is the point. If I do make a point today, I'll get to it hopefully, and that's all about the live business. And that's really, but management kind of jumps in there too. So.
Yeah.
Thanks for being with us. This is actually great. I agree with the fidelity of increased even fashion and technology has because people are trying to find the outlet for TV. And as someone who's fairly young and would seem to go along with that, I also think the emotional impact of most music is dropping radically. But I'm curious to hear a little bit about what you three envision the future of the fan is, because it feels like my generation even, it was democratically, you had to get fans one by one because they were investing in it. So you were having this democratic nation of people that recommended you. Now it seems like fans are just trying to buy swaths of people's interest on demographic lines. They're trying to buy 7 million views from girls 21 to 25. So is the future more homogenization or individualization?
I think it's communitization. I don't know what the word is, but I think, and this is why EDM is winning. You have to get your Pied Piper on. I think it's why the most interesting music moves in digital world are things like Pledge Music and Kickstarter, because they offer the first glimmers of like, let's come together. And some artists are terrified of that. You have to go over to their house and make them dinner and play Parcheesi with them because they gave you $1,000, and it's like, but then obviously like Amanda Palmer, it's probably hard to get her to leave, you know, like this is what she lives for, is that kind of like hyper engagement. So I think it's going to be about community. I think there's going to be a renaissance of that notion. I'm from DC, in DC, the punk rock tradition was intensely about community, like to the point that I don't think they knew about other bands from other towns. And that got knocked for a loop, but I think it's going to come back, but I think in a different form, and I think that's going to be what you're going to see developing over the next 5 years.
Travis, how for you, I mean, having a more open relationship with your fans, or them, I guess, having more access to you, right? I mean, they can follow you on Twitter, they can send you a message that way.
I'm everywhere.
I mean, has that been a good and positive and useful experience for you, or does it ever start to feel sort of dangerous maybe to your creative process?
I mean, I could see how it could be dangerous. It's important for any artist to find personal time. I mean, there's always the question of what a pure spiritual seeker like John Coltrane would have done with Twitter. Mm-hmm. Like, he might have been like, oh, this is fun, all these people saying things to me. Hi, great, thank you. And then they get off and starts practicing for 10 hours a day again. So I'm personally pretty outgoing, so it fits me, you know, kind of like a glove. I think it depends on the artist, really. I could see some artists, it would just mess them up. Just be like, no, Twitter.
I don't think so.
Right.
Oh,
I mean,
right?
so many, as you well know, so many performing artists are a weird blend of introvert and extrovert. You know, you must see so many examples where it's like, well, he wanted to go party, now he wants to go home. Okay. And I rock that every day. just leave me alone. But until then, party with me. So, I mean, you must see that with a lot of artists you work with. And so I think it's a lot of like just another step of self-managing that. What do you see as like, do you have situations where you're like, I'll tell you a good story. Our management manages Blues Traveler. Blues Traveler made some joke about the Pope eating babies. And, you know, some really immature joke. But it turns out there's a fair amount of Catholic, Blues Traveler is a popular band, and there's a fair amount of popular, any popular band has a lot of Catholic fans. So it actually was a thing, a problem. So he had, the management made him, the guy managed to get him to do a retraction, and then he tweeted, all right, and I had to do that retraction because of my manager. If you'd like to discuss him, his name is Matt, and his phone number is 50 bum bum bum. So he got fired from the social media. So here's an example of, you know, with this introvert-extrovert extreme thing that many artists are, of the dangers of it. I'd be interested to know what you, if you have any horror stories, or if you have any, that maybe this might be more of a management kind of question, like artists and their social media habits.
Yeah, I don't really, that is a management thing. I mean, I love that fine line between introvert and extrovert is incredible. It's funny. A lot when a person walks into my office with a song, you know what I mean? It's like, do I want to, you know, first thing I think of, like, you know, it's like that. Do I want to be with this person for the rest of my life? You know, that whole thing. You know, no, I just want to date. You know, no, am I going to marry this person? I'm already like, you know, fighting over their estate to their grandchildren. But you know, there's that whole thing about that yin and yang, man. And I feel like as an A&R person, by the way, I'm a music publisher A&R person. So there's a big difference, and I don't want to waste everybody's time, but I do publishing. I do the songwriter part of it. Another long story. But you know, it's kind of like that psychology 101 kind of thing. I'm like, is this guy crazy? Like, is this person going to call me at 5 o'clock in the morning because you know, because they can't, because they have writer's block or something? Right. You know what I mean? So balance.
I will say I've known artists who I think their productivity, their ability to focus has suffered because of social media. Mm-hmm. I know them well, and I know it's an issue.
Mm-hmm. I would love to tell, and I will tell this at the barbecue with my hipster friends for the rest of my days, and I won't get into it, but the moment of social media with this massive, unnamed young rapper, there was a social media moment that it was, you know, here it is, this guy's the most in-demand entertainer in, you know, under 25. And they were all, and there was a moment of social media. It was incredible. It was such a distraction, you know. It was like, get off your thing and go out and be a rock star, dude. Like, don't.
Oh, you mean like they were?
Rock star.
You mean like they had to go play a show and they were tweeting?
No, it was just they were in the studio talking all the talk, what you would talk as a rock star, as opposed to a rock star, rap star, whatever. And but it was really, they kind of couldn't get beyond or repudiate the internet. It was really funny.
We have time for one more question. Okay, yes.
Hi, I'm a writer for Science Magazine. It's the digital magazine for tablets and smartphones. So we actually talk to the people we interview a lot about social media. In fact, Darwin Dees, who I interviewed, I asked him, how do hipsters feel about your music? Because this music is pretty esoteric and weird. And he said, let's get this straight. Hipsters don't like my music, which I found very interesting. There seems to be, when you mentioned Miley and Lorde, I really found that interesting because I never really think of Miley as hip-hop. There seems to be a divide between authenticity and persona, and they lead into each other. So nowadays when people are getting discovered via SoundCloud and YouTube, do you think that they have to compromise a bit of their authenticity in order to be as big as Lorde or as big as Miley?
Well, I think I mean, just to get on the terms, I think there's the persona of authenticity. right? That's still very much constructed, that the claimed authenticity is based on acts of artifice that seem credible, right? So I don't know if I would, buy into that distinction as they relate to genre per se.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Please, yeah.
I was just going to say that I think in the arts, the narrative of someone who was fooling themselves and then once they copped to who they really were, hit it big, is much more common than the eccentric who suppressed something and through the suppression made it big. I think the eccentricities have to be channeled into a form that's flattering and resonant and not perverse. But, we were talking about those Lilith Fair artists. Tori Amos tried to make it as a pop metal artist. That didn't work out too good. And then, and then Alanis Morissette, I think, was like a TV star. I think she tried to do like synth pop in Canada at one point. And then she did.
Joel was a prog rocker, right?
Billy Joel was a prog rocker, right? And then finally, obviously when he was just like, oh my, I just really like Broadway. I just like show tunes. I'm just gonna write show tunes. It's all I can do. I'm not good at Yes. I can't be in Yes. He became Billy Joel. So actually, I actually think that in most cases, when the core eccentricity finds a non-perverse, non-confrontational, and those are two keys, way of expressing itself, that's usually when an artist actually starts to get traction in the culture.
But Billy Joel,
I keep telling myself that.
But Billy Joel, like everybody else in 1983, did their own new wave album too. So let's not forget that.
I think
True,
that,
but his take on new wave was like, oh, what did he say? It's just rock and roll. And then he continued to tinkle.
I think that, right now we are in, I'm not sure this is going to answer this directly, but I think we're in a moment of sort of the 60s kind of talked, like Woodstock, right? Wasn't Woodstock supposed to be like a multicultural rock and roll genreless thing, right? And maybe it was for that 4 days or whatever, and then it kind of all got, and then it had what happened at the speed. There was Rolling Stone and stabbed the black guy and all that stuff. I think what we're seeing right now is a real genreless event. I'm not sure, I have children, they're 8. They are, even me, who I'm pretty sensitive, I try to be, pretty socially conscious, etc. They are so far advanced with gender, with race, with sexuality. They're so far advanced that I am, and I think we're really starting to find that musically, we're in a genreless place where Miley Cyrus can be. Mike Will is the guy who he's like this rap guy, and he did her record, and there's a kind of a genreless moment that's happening right now, which is really actually quite amazing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one more, yes.
Music's not alone. The whole culture of manufacturing, all the fields are expanding and entwining at the same time. So this goes back to earlier, when you were speaking about how musicians find their niche, how do they monetize their own. I think we're just seeing such a huge ocean wave of all the cultures merging at this point. Something that we're going to have that we're doing for the next 10 years. So much stuff going on. Well, everybody's a filmmaker, everybody's got their script, everybody's a photographer now, everybody's doing their music, it's all across the board.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, it's a bright future.
Bright future.
Thank you guys so much for doing this. Travis, Randall, Jake, it's a pleasure. And thank you all for coming.